Accusations that shattered my world. My husband believes I murdered his sister. Can this marriage be saved? So my husband accused me of murder out of the blue, and now our marriage is falling apart. How can I salvage our relationship and rebuild trust? This is long and ridiculous, sorry. My 30 female husband, Luke, 33 male, had a sister, Laura, 29 female. We were all close and saw each other 2 to 3 times a month, along with their parents. Almost 6 months ago, Laura fell down the stairs at their family home and died. It was a freak accident. There's a window on the half landing, and she hit her head on the sill. I was the last person to see her. I was there for less than 10 minutes, and she was in her pajamas making coffee. I didn't even stay for a drink, and I struggle with how such a brief and meaningless interaction could have been her last. She deserved so much more. My husband and I have only been married for a year, but we've been together for 4 and have known each other for 20 plus. When Laura's parents found her, they called my husband straight away, and we rushed over. So we faced the whole thing as a family. In the days after, Luke started quizzing me. Exactly what we talked about, what she was wearing, where we were standing at set. It progressed to saying I was providing conflicting information. On tiny details he was deliberately misunderstanding and accusing me of withholding information because I couldn't tell him things like what pajamas she was wearing. This escalated quickly but lasted for less than a week as I lost my cool and made it clear that I was done answering questions. He didn't bring it up again, and I wrote it off as a grief quirk. His behavior is generally that of a normal grieving person. So last Friday, he outright accused me of murdering her in front of his parents, out of the blue. Atais, isem blue. Odervistable and bring one salsa was not in bidder trading twartal with stratery he outright outshakuskish. Though we were all stunned, there was an inquest which recently concluded, and there was never any doubt the verdict would be accidental death. He said it was completely obvious, and he couldn't believe that no one else could see it. He claims I went through his phone and found his messages with Laura. I have absolutely no idea what messages he's talking about. I have never looked at his phone, and that I went over to confront her and got out of hand. Then I pushed her downstairs. By the end, he was shouting about going to the police and getting the inquest overturned, and how I wasn't going to get away with it. And let me be clear, Laura and I had a great relationship. We all did. I have no idea where this has come from, other than these messages I haven't seen. And even then, I don't think there's anything I could ever see on someone's phone that would drive me to murder. It's just ridiculous. He's been with his parents since this happened and will not talk to me at all. I've had some contact with his mom, but she's not being very communicative. The last I heard, she didn't know what messages he was referring to either. What messages he was referring to either. I'm still completely stunned, and I have no idea how to proceed. I made a commitment to be there for him always, and I understand that grief can manifest in strange ways. But part of me feels like my love for him died the second, and he called me a murderer, and I don't know how we could possibly work through this. I also really don't want to be thought of in this way, and I have no idea if he has said anything to people we know. I obviously haven't. A brain tumor or psychotic break has crossed my mind, and I suggested it to his mother, and she just said she'll talk to him. And other than the questions before, he hasn't been acting odd. Obviously, he's been grieving, but he seems sane and sensible other than this. I feel like I'm going mad. Does anyone have any advice at all? Too long, didn't read. My husband's sister died in a horrible accident, and my husband, for absolutely no reason other than some mystery messages, thinks I murdered her. Edit. It has come to my attention that I accidentally used Laura's real name once in this post. Can I kindly ask anyone who commented, who is real name, delete their comment, as I really don't want this to bleed into my real life, for obvious reasons. Relevant comments. Morale talk. Fuck no. You don't salvage this, you get a lawyer and get the fuck out. Best case scenario. He has just admitted to sending messages with his sister that he thinks would make you angry enough to kill her over them. I have some ideas about what those might be, and they're all bad. How did the parents react when he did this? OP answer. When he first laid out the accusation, at his parents' house, both his mother and I just kept asking him about the messages, and all he would say was that I knew exactly what messages he was talking about. She was as stunned as me, and his father just said he didn't understand what he was talking about. He's a man of few words, but there was plenty of head shaking. The whole thing was surreal. No one knew how to react. Wonderful. Prior 381, you need to get a lawyer to protect yourself in case he does go to the police. I would write down everything that you can remember that happened that day and keep it just in case. He may be having a psychotic break. As stated, don't talk to him or his immediate family or your friends without someone present, or preferably by text or email. Save everything. You need to take his accusations seriously and cover your ass. OP answer. I was interviewed by the coroner's office after her death, as I was the last person to see her. She died about 3 hours after I saw her, and I'd been to the supermarket and was home by that point. It's all verifiable and was a recorded interview. I haven't spoken to anyone but his mother, and that's only been over messages. She's never been a big texter, but she has seemed very cagey over the past few days. I don't know if this means she's seen the messages. I've asked and been ignored. Girl, she's good. So I think they mean to record everything you remember about the day you're soon to be accused you of murder. So OP answer. I'm feeling so freaked out at the idea that he came up with this almost immediately after her death and has either been sitting on it or planning his confrontation, that I'm basically trying to dissect the past 6 months. And maybe it's time I start writing things down. Right until it happened, things felt very normal. Obviously, her death has been felt deeply by all of us and things aren't anything like they were, but there have been no signs of anything like this, even on the day. OP on getting the messages. I'm absolutely desperate to see these messages because I'm right there with you on the sheer wackiness of what they have to contain. It hadn't occurred to me that they might not exist. I've never known him to lie, but I do think a mental health issue is a real possibility. His relationship with his sister didn't seem odd, and I've never been interested in his phone, but he's never been defensive about it either, so I think you might be right. If I had such incriminating messages, I'd probably worry about them before now. And when told to find an old iPad to use to access them, I have his iCloud password. It has a backup from yesterday. I have no idea how to turn this into something I can actually use. It doesn't have a messages folder or any signs of how to use it for anything other than restoring a whole phone, which I don't want to do. Does anyone know how to actually get the messages from this? Sorry to throw a tech support request in. I can't believe I didn't think of this. A huge thanks to the person who suggested it. Can I force my husband to get a mental health assessment, and do I risk being arrested, sure prosecuted? So we're in England. I'm in a bizarre and complex situation with my husband. I have broken the law, and I feel I have no choice but to do so again for my safety. I don't know what type of solicitor I need or what the next steps should look like. We're in England, and I'll try not to editorialize too much. My husband's sister died suddenly at the start of the year. Her death was an accident, and there was no suggestion to the contrary. The inquest was recently concluded, and a verdict of accidental death returned. I was the last person to see her, but her time of death, which was almost immediate due to her injury, was confirmed to be hours after I had left the house. All of this was verified at the time. In the immediate aftermath, my husband behaved strangely and kept trying to trip up my story of the last time we saw each other, which was a brief interaction. Last week, months after this was first and last mentioned, he outright accused me of murder in front of his parents. He says I saw his messages with his sister and confronted her, and that he's going to have the coroner's decision overturned and have the police investigate. I haven't seen or heard from him since. Today is day 9. I posted for advice on Reddit, and I'm pretty desperate at this point, and it has spooked me, quite reasonably I think, but also led to me committing a crime and planning another. My husband's iCloud credentials were saved on an old iPad in his office, and I downloaded his backup last night. I have read all of his messages with his sister, and there's absolutely nothing like he describes. Thumbtint, I understand this is illegal and I'm concerned about the possible ramifications. I am also waiting for a callback from a locksmith to change the locks on the home we own together, which I believe is also against the law. So this leads to my actual questions. I feel justified in what I've done for my safety, but is there a degree of pragmatism under the law for these issues because of the situation, or am I shooting myself in the foot? I am resigned to the fact my relationship is over, but his parents don't seem to be taking this seriously, and they're icing me out. I believe this is a serious mental health issue which may put people, namely me, at risk. Can I do anything about this when all I have is the fact I'm being accused of murder? I feel he needs to be detained and this should be investigated as a full-blown psychotic break. Sorry, this is all a bit mental. In addition, what type of solicitor do I need? My understanding is that a coroner decision can't be appealed. Is that correct? Are his accusations going to go anywhere? Can I protect myself from this or stop him escalating to telling others? We live in our hometown and everyone knows everyone. This could follow me forever, and it's either a lie or a delusion, so any advice would be greatly appreciated. So relevant comments when told OP can't lock out her husband or force him to get a psych evaluation. OP answer. Thank you so much for your response. Locking each other out doesn't sound like a pattern I want to get into, but I think I'll go ahead and change them once on the basis that it isn't. You did this, so you have to leave the house. And also, you'll be prosecuted. With the levels of seriousness in terms of him being deemed to lack capacity, is there any way I can trigger the process that you know of? Is something like this sufficient for the Mental Health Act to kick in? I've been Googling, and you can be detained if professionals think your mental health puts you or others at risk and you need to be in hospital seems very vague. Obviously, I'm biased, but accusing someone of murder and screaming about how they aren't going to get away with it feels like risky behavior. Does he need to have made explicit threats, or is there a clearer bar to meet? Sorry for asking so many questions. So no firefighter 9257. You are jumping ahead of yourself and playing out situations that have not occurred. So if your husband reports you to the police for accessing his data, and you are subsequently arrested or taken in for questioning, then obtain the services of a criminal solicitor for advice. With respect of changing locks, ending your marriage, seek a solicitor that deals with family loss or divorce. If you feel that you are at risk from your husband, talk to a domestic abuse helpline. If you feel you are at an immediate risk of harm, then call the police. If you think your husband is mentally ill and presents a risk to himself or others, call the police, OP answer. I don't think that's a fair assessment. Being accused of arguably the most serious crime to exist has most definitely occurred. My understanding of the law is that something is illegal whether you are reported to the police or not. So those messages are evidence as far as I'm concerned that his accusations are false. They were apparently the trigger to me literally murdering someone I was extremely close to. I have illegally accessed them, and I don't think it's unreasonable to inquire as to the potential impact of that. I am fully aware that I need a solicitor, but as you're probably aware, today is Sunday. I don't know if I need to seek someone out based on a divorce, which honestly, if this is a mental health issue, is not going to be something I go for, or a criminal solicitor, or someone who deals with the Mental Health Act, as my absolute priority preference is getting him assessed. My only exposure to the legal system in my entire life was through the inquest. And that is obviously completely different to any of this. I'm not educated in this area. Commenter, it's sad and slightly suspicious that OP is jumping ahead to mental health assessments to defend themselves from accusations of murder when their husband is clearly going through some serious issues coping with the death of his sister. To OP answer, what else can I do? He has blocked me everywhere, and we went from a normal couple dealing with the new normal 6 months after the death of his sister, to me being accused of murder over a family dinner because of messages which clearly don't exist, and it's been 9 days and I've heard nothing since. Can I remind you that the inquest was held and concluded? I dropped off some Tupperware, grabbed an umbrella I'd left behind the previous week, went to a big Tesco, then went home and called my mom. I was already home by the time she died, and my whereabouts were extremely easy to verify because my husband was home all day. It's obvious that he's going through some serious issues coping with the death of his sister. That is the exact point of all of this. Update 1. Firstly, thank you to those who helped me get to my husband's iCloud backups through an old iPad. I wasn't expecting much from Reddit, but I got valuable practical advice before my post was locked, and I appreciate it. There were no crazy or even suspicious messages. I've searched for over 100 terms and scrolled back over the years. I saw a side of them both I wasn't expecting, but nothing that explains the claim I murdered Laura over their chats. Nothing to suggest he was cheating. Absolutely nothing to suggest incest. I repeat, so no incest. No weird gaps when edited conversations or a switch to another app would fit. Just siblings making plans, sending memes, and gossiping. They said unexpectedly horrible stuff about a few people, but not me. It was a sort of relief, but it raised more questions than it answered. I sought legal advice, also from Reddit, after posting here. Turns out my options are divorce him or same. I contacted my community mental health team, who said they'd reach out, but made it clear it wasn't urgent. I then called his mom and said that if I didn't hear from him by this weekend, I would get a solicitor and ask for a mental health assessment as part of the divorce. In response, he made a ridiculous post to Facebook, which neither of us have used in years, and everything blew up. I'm going to try to keep this succinct. On Friday night, he made a long accusation on Facebook with new information. So he said he'd been planning to leave me for months with his sister's support, and I found the messages and murdered her. So coroner has reopened the case, and the police are preparing to arrest me, and he needs to make sure people know before the trial stops him talking about it. It was well written and seemed vaguely plausible. He messaged people with links, so it got some attention. So we live in our hometown and have a large circle of friends because we've been here all our lives. People I haven't spoken to since school were reaching out to me asking WTF was going on. It was madness. In response, I posted the export of his entire conversation history with Laura, also to Facebook when I finally got back in. I linked to the chat along with a post explaining my side and noting that I had changed my ex's iCloud and Apple passwords, and that if he wanted them back, he should comment on my post and update his own, admitting that he was lying. He eventually did. When I started getting messages about his post, I panicked, and changing his password seemed important to preserve everything because he'd know I had access. When I spoke to him the next morning, it's clear he's not having a mental episode at all, but is claiming one because he's been caught in a big lie. As soon as he was outed, he called me, clearly drunk, begging and promising to explain everything if I deleted my post. I hung up and told him to call back the next day. He did. After many missed calls and texts, and he tried to bargain and guilt-trip me with his mental health until it was clear the wrong people had seen his conversation. So it's hard to describe, but it seemed fake. It was too well rehearsed, and then this morning, when it was clear he was getting nowhere, he blocked me. Begging for mercy and reciting facts about mental disorders doesn't align with someone in crisis with a sincere belief that someone murdered their sibling. The question of why he did all this remains unanswered, and he will not be getting his passwords until it is. The legal advice subreddit said this stuff is technically illegal, but it's beneath a court to take action, so I'm going to count on that because I felt like I had no other choice at the time. And now I don't see any other way to get answers from him. I am desperate, and it's all I've got. So there we are. The relationship I have believed was my destiny since I was a teenager has boiled down to petty, convoluted, and vindictive bullshit, played out on social media for reasons still unknown. My hope for a brain tumor is fading, and clearly tomorrow morning is going to be when I lawyer up and stop posting about this. I am mortified. I have no idea whether some people might believe him, and I still don't know why this all happened in the first place. Sorry, I don't have a happier update, and thanks once again to everyone who offered advice. Relevant comments OP on her husband's reaction after confessing to lying. OP answer: he didn't react at all. He'd called me tens of times at that point, and we'd had 5 conversations on the phone about it. So he was laser focused on me deleting the chat log from the get-go. But when I made it clear that posting that comment and editing his original Facebook post was the only way to progress the conversation at all, he finally did it. Then he went silent publicly as far as I can see, but continued begging me behind the scenes. Henna Karina, what on earth is in those chats that he's so desperate to keep people from seeing, and that would conceivably lead you to kill someone? Is there any chance they were using some kind of code or something? OP answer: I think it was the fact that it proved his story false, alongside the way they spoke about some people. It was really damaging stuff, and I can see why he panicked. I hated to do it to him, but I really couldn't think of anything else because so many people had questions. Sonic Blue 2117. Sounds like he's staging mental issues to get rid of you or create a reason he's not responsible. Cheating? Money missing from work, personal or family? OP answer: this is exactly how it comes across. He kept saying about how various behaviors he's shown over the years fit anxiety and depression. They don't, and that his vulnerability has led to a complex grief-related breakdown. He is not particularly informed on mental health issues, so I don't understand how he went from a drunken shambles to that level of insight overnight, when he had apparently been in active crisis, posting horrible lies on Facebook, to less than 2 hours before calling me initially. You make an interesting point about finances that could be something weird, but definitely not to the extent that it explains any of this. So when Laura died, she had a loan and credit account that no one knew about. The total on them was less than $3,000, and I don't know what happened because they weren't mentioned much after they came up initially, but everyone was a bit surprised. She lived for the weekend and went away with the girls, so it wasn't hugely suspicious, and it was confirmed there were no unusual transactions in her accounts, but it was odd. She was saving to move out, so she was pretty open about her finances generally, because she was excited about her savings goals. I don't think it points to anything, but I'm at a point where anything could be relevant because it's all such a mess. Update 2. Hi everyone, me again. Both times I've posted here it has paid off hugely in terms of helping unravel this mess, so I hope it's third time lucky. For the past few weeks, I've been trying to figure out why my husband suddenly accused me of murdering his sister, who died in an accident at home 6 months ago. So it still feels as ridiculous now as it did then. It was odd because she was pretty open about her finances, but it wasn't out of character for her to overspend, so I hadn't really thought about it since. Opportunity like that pages significant was entire to tag me through my Dyson's chest, suppers a tin on a sleep soap when the are either in a wine fake cherries, but he has a comment on my last post prompted me to look more closely at money stuff and a message to my husband from Laura asking about a payment stuck out. I'd initially assumed it was about a car issue she'd had a few weeks before she died, but Luke definitely paid at the garage when they picked it up because we talked about it after she dropped him home. It didn't occur to me when I first looked through. The messages supposedly proved I was a murderer, so I'd been looking for something scandalous. The message about payment was the only thing I had at that point, and I had no idea what it meant, so I took a chance. I told his mother I knew about the money, and that if he didn't get in touch with me that day, I would make sure everybody else did too. He called me straight away and asked me over to his parents' house to talk. He looked dreadful, and the first thing he asked me was whether I was happy now all of his friends hate him. I told him I don't give a fuck about his relationships and that I was there for answers. It turns out my husband told the coroner's office that he was secretly helping Laura pay some of her debt because she was embarrassed and struggling to keep up with her lifestyle. I assume it didn't seem suspicious because her death was clearly an accident, and that's what they were investigating. In reality, he took out loans and store cards in her name, and she somehow found out a few weeks before she died. Some guy he works with had apparently done it before and arranged it all, and if Laura hadn't found out, he claims they could have had it written off without her ever knowing. When she did find out, the guy left him high and dry, quite surprised, and he had to pay it off. I'm inclined to believe that's the gist of what happened, but I am shocked my husband would do something this stupid. When she died so soon after, his brief and apparently genuine suspicion was that she had told me about it that day, and we argued and I'd killed her. He couldn't explain why I would kill someone because they were a victim of fraud, but according to him, he felt guilty in the immediate aftermath and his brain made it fit. I mostly believe this, but he tried launching into more weaponized therapy speak at that point, so I cut the topic off. A few months after his sister's death, Luke received a letter from a credit company, not even the police, saying he was being investigated. Laura didn't have much, so her debts, which were less than $10,000 even with the fraud, were mostly written off. Something obviously flagged against Fly husband during that process. I don't know how or why. When the letters got more threatening, he believed the investigation would reopen the inquest and that he would be accused of fraud, perjury, and because of his previously unknown motive, possibly murder. He claims the only thing the company investigating him actually knows is that the fraud came from our address. So accusing me would make it impossible to prove because it would be a coin toss, his words, as to which one of us took out the credit in Laura's name. That was worth our entire marriage to him and my reputation in the community we have been part of for our entire lives. He says self-preservation kicked in and nothing else mattered when he thought about what could happen to him. When I asked him how his witness statement fits into his plan, because it proved he lied either way by acknowledging he knew about the debt and paying it, obviously, my response was to ask why, if he hadn't thought of it. He specifically said it was a lie he needed to cover earlier in the conversation. Suddenly, he's sobbing and his parents are rushing in to ask me to leave. I was in tears at this point, asking how the fuck he could do this to me over something so stupid, and how much his parents knew about this, as his mom was pushing me out of their house. But all she said was that she couldn't have this conversation with me. She was crying too, but wouldn't say another word. I am now 99% sure the fucker was trying to frame me. Not for her death, but for the fraud. He was going to claim that he was lying for me in the coroner's interview, right? If he wrapped it all up as quietly paying her off on my behalf than genuinely suspecting me of her murder, it would protect his reputation and point the finger at me. It just doesn't make sense any other way. Is my husband trying to frame me to weasel out of his actions? And how do I get to the bottom of this? I'm obviously open to theories because Reddit is the only reason I got this far in the first place. That being said, please don't come up with conspiracies about Laura's death in the comments. Sip's upsetting. She was wearing shitty old slippers and walking upstairs with a cup of tea, and she slipped and hit her head on a windowsill. This was never a murder mystery, it was someone's life, and she died just because. And maybe a butterfly flapped its wings somewhere, I don't know, but it's hard enough to accept without having guesses shouted at me. On the internet whilst my marriage falls apart. Relevant comments. Even budget, Tactress78. I mean, framing you for fraud seems the most plausible from what you found, though it's an incredibly idiotic frame job. That wouldn't work. So I have to say, he sounds incredibly dumb. As an explanation, it's probably the best you are going to get, though very unsatisfying. I am mystified by his parents' behavior and what he thought that Facebook post was going to accomplish. It's not like the investigators are going to go pull the town. He could have just written back to them that he knew nothing about these cards and the only people at that address were you and him. There was no need in this weird plot to ruin your reputation publicly. But again, he sounds very dumb, so I guess that made sense to him. So sorry this happened to you, but I suspect in several years' time, hopefully sooner, you will see being rid of him and his family was actually a blessing. I wish you your very best life going forward. OP answer. This is what I don't understand. So he's behaved impulsively before, but never anything like this. I understand that he didn't take the fraud seriously until he was caught by Laura, and I can get that her death would have made him anxious about it. But I don't know what would possess him to think he could just pass it along. It's baffling. Even budget 2078. What's also strange is that it sounds like the fraud amount was low enough that, well, yes, he'd get in trouble, it isn't like he's going to be ruined. And not that this is a good thing, but white-collar crime is not exactly strongly prosecuted in the UK. Plus, it sounds like a repayment settlement could have solved this. Unless he works in finance or needs a security clearance, this wouldn't be something he couldn't recover from. So also very odd is that you were his alibi for the accident. I realize that wasn't necessary as this was an accident regardless of alibis, but still it's very dumb if he was worried about this being known as a motive, that he would alienate his alibi. I keep coming back to the dumb part, only explanation that makes sense. LL edited. Changed US to UK, where OP is. OP answer. This is exactly it. 3,000 would have been manageable. He could have set up a simple plan to repay it over a year, and he'd have needed to tighten up but would have been fine. But it was a private company, so getting their money back would obviously be more of a priority than seeking prosecution. This is also part of why his story doesn't make sense. It's such a small amount in the grand scheme of things to blow up your entire life. So the only thing I can think of is pure desperation to protect his reputation. But even then, who goes that far? Strong Bottle 4161. Is he someone that really prides himself of his reputation? Is his job in finances? OP answer. He's a mechanic, so he's got a bit of a masculine pride thing going on. Sippy always wants to be seen as a good salt of the earth, do anything for anyone type person, and whilst actually being a good person sometimes slips, usually in the way he talks to people after a drink. Ingeg na may ito say nistepent kasolan ay respect to beautiful after ains and ard eyes. Claim if do re-seen as a goods to be seen. The never ever to the point where I'd think he'd take loans out in people's names or try to ruin me like this. Saint Blay. I'm sure you've been asked this before, but is he on drugs? OP answer. He's a casual drug user, but I've never seen signs of it getting unhealthy. He does cocaine maybe 8-10x per year, and I've never known him buy it when his money would have been better spent on something else. He's better at spending money than having it generally, but he's never ever shown signs of being greedy or deceitful. How do you seek justice when even those you trust have their hands dirty? My mother's fiancé stole my $7,000 college savings, and my family used my dad's inheritance without telling me. So my grandparents on my mother's side are making me a lot of hate after my mother and her fiancé were detained. I had good cause to call the cops on them, hence this happened. My mother and I never got along, particularly given that my dad died 10 years ago. Right now I'm 7. In a few months I should be beginning college. I realized I would have to work for myself and create my own plans since, sadly, I knew my mother would never have any money saved away for me. So I started working at 14 years old. After school, I would work part-time. For 4 years, I had been saving to have at least some money left aside. I would also save it as I usually get cash from my relatives on my birthdays as presents and occasionally on holidays. I was really glad to have almost $7,000 saved thus far. Of course, it was all in cash, and I kept it carefully stashed in a small wooden box my father had fashioned for me in a little nook of my cupboard. And my mother never let me open a bank account, hence that was out of the question as I never had one. I never told my mother or anybody else about the money, hence I'm not sure how anyone came upon it. Still, a few days ago I discovered the box was absolutely empty. When I approached my mother about it, she informed me her fiancé had taken the money to put toward his new property. Finding out what had transpired sent me totally insane. My mom and her fiancé were on one side of the great argument raging in the home while I was on another. Ultimately, though, I am just 17 and they are in power right now, so I had to compromise. So this was my life, hence the only thing I could do was walk up to my room, shut myself in, and spend hours crying as I would have to start over yet once more. Before college, I wasn't even sure if I could save enough money for anything. I felt so demoralized and totally lost. That day, I formed my mental picture. Since it cannot go unpacked, I was planning to exact revenge on them. Though it was a really large choice, fortunately, I was able to extract revenge exactly 3 days later. They have now been arrested and are paying for the crime they did. My sole issue with this whole situation is that my always on my side grandparents are now against me, and it just doesn't make sense anymore. For the past 2 years, my mother's fiancé, I'll call him Rob, has been in my life. I have despised every single second of it since he is simply among the most horrible persons I have ever known. I would even consider him to be abusive. Clearly vocally and emotionally rather than physically. Usually my mother takes the most of it, but sometimes he loses his patience with me too, and says anything that comes to mind. He curses me out, tries his very best to make me cry like my mother, and becomes even more enraged when he discovers I don't care. This causes him to lose even more control of his tongue and what he says. My mother never bothers to defend me. After my dad went away, my mother did not date anyone for the first couple of years. Then she met Rob later. He was polite and reasonable for the first few months, but he began displaying his actual colors after their first major argument. 6 months into their marriage, he had moved in with us and begun controlling my mother. He could hardly hang on any work and was a deadbeat, no good imbecile. Contextually, he is in his mid to late 30s and still depends on his parents for money, sometimes since he has utterly poor financial sense and wastes more money than he makes. He borrows money from his parents when he is battling with my mother. When he's not, he's comfortable enough leeching off her. The unfortunate thing is that my mother is not quite rich. She brings home a reasonable amount, but not enough to maintain Rob's ostentatious lifestyle. She is a floor supervisor at our neighborhood grocery. Still, I never let it start to trouble me. I always aim to be as self-sufficient as I can. From the age of 14, I have refrained from asking my mother anything except for basics. Not even would I ask her to pay for those once I started working part-time. I really rely on her for shelter and food. I never ask her to buy me anything. That's all. I know that even expecting that is somewhat stupid. Thus, I do not expect her to do anything more for me. From the start, she has made it rather evident that she despises me. She never really treated me well even as a little child, and I always felt as though she didn't even want me. That impression developed into a belief as I grew older. At least earlier, I had my dad to have my back and stand up to my mother anytime she would get too mad at me. But I was on my own once he went away. And that is how it has been for the last few years. Things grew worse when Rob arrived, but I always comforted myself by reminding myself that shortly I would be off to college and wouldn't have to worry about any of this. That feels dark and improbable right now. I stayed in my room and did nothing for the 3 days my money was taken away because I was so depressed. So we moved into our new house the day I found out all my money had been seized. I did all the required work, but I avoided talking to either of the 2 persons living with me, so they seemed no worse for it either. My mother instructed me to get ready for the evening housewarming party on the 3rd day. Having had my money snatched from me, I started yelling at her and told her I wouldn't be doing anything of the such. Their sole means of purchasing this mansion had been the money they pilfered from me. That particularly infuriated my mother. Referring to the fact she had raised me, she advised me to be glad for them now that we were finally living in our own house and not a rented property, and should just suck it up and let things go since I owe them for life anyhow. Which is not even logical since she was legally obligated to do it, and it is not like she gave me any great favor. Regarding the house, it was very large for the three of us anyway. I knew they had purchased this house specifically to wow everyone with their elegant address and large residence. That day I was quite agitated and chose to phone the parents of my father, something I had never done before. It was complicated as my paternal grandparents had cut off contact with our family when my dad died. I suppose it hurt too much for them to keep in touch. They cut ties and we stopped having speaking terms. I'm not sure why, but I still had their numbers, so as a last resort I chose to phone them since my mother's grandparents, with whom I had a stronger relationship, were really somewhat neutral in this regard. I told my mother's parents about the day my money was taken, expecting they would speak with her and assist in resolving things for me. On the plus side, we would at last have a place of our own and wouldn't have to worry about rent. They just stated they were delighted my mother could purchase a new house. They advised me to hunt the silver lining. Their response seemed strange to me since, up to now, they had always understood me. Though they would silently support me, they never challenged my mother. This time was different and I couldn't make sense of it. I avoided them once more since I was also furious with them. That same day, when my mother advised me to swallow it, I made contact with my paternal grandparents in search of a different answers, one that may provide some future hope. It was only a gut feeling. Luckily, they answered the call, and I told them everything right away. I said I knew they were hurt and didn't want to keep in touch, but because this was an emergency and I thought my dad would have wanted them to help me should he still be alive. So I told them my mother had grabbed all of my savings, which I had been saving for over a few years to cover college. I suddenly had no idea whether that was even possible anymore. After listening to me, my grandfather started something that baffled me. He informed me that evidently my dad left a college fund for me, so he didn't know why I had to save money separately. So that news surprised me as my mother had never mentioned a college fund, and I never asked her since I figured she hadn't saved any money for me. And knowing his death was very certain, I had totally forgotten what my dad might have done for me before he died. So he passed really young, hence I assumed he might not have had time to arrange for me. So I was astounded when my grandparents told me this. Furious and annoyed as well, I asked them whether they had any documentation or evidence I might use against my mother. So they promised to hunt for something and call me later. I stayed in my room attempting to fit everything together for several hours. I came to see that Rob and my mother had clearly teamed together and pilfers my college money to purchase this mansion. From what I knew, my mother did not make enough money to buy the house. Regarding Rob, he had not worked anywhere for the past 3 months, thus I strongly questioned whether he could afford a residence of this kind. I would then report them to the police. I simply needed something to validate this. My grandparents finally contacted me after waiting for a few hours and supplied pictures of some documents my mother had actually signed saying she would use the money my father left her to pay for my college tuition, guarantee I had a comfortable life. She had done everything but guarantee that my life was comfortable, so I literally laughed out loud when I read it. She indeed went out of her way to make my life more unpleasant. Still, Mother had signed those papers, and it infuriated me that my grandparents had never mentioned it until. After my dad died, they had simply left me behind, and my mother had not really been there for me. Though I believe it was all a show, my mother and grandparents tried to be there for me. My dad's parents were too consumed in their own loss to give me any thought. My grandparents gave a somewhat poor response when I inquired why they had never shown me these papers prior. At the time, I was too young anyhow. They told me they had sort of forgotten about it when my dad died. And once I grew older, we were not on speaking terms anymore, and it had escaped their thoughts since they too were getting older. I just let it go since I couldn't dispute that. So once I received the evidence, I phoned a friend whose dad was on the force and explained I needed his assistance. So in the evening, just as the housewarming party was getting underway, my friend's father arrived with another cop and a lawyer to arrest my mom and her fiancé. Their commitment had been obviously breached, and the problem was not only that promise breaking, but my mother had essentially opened herself to a lawsuit by straying from what she had promised, therefore breaching the terms of the agreement she had signed all those years ago. My mother and Rob were finally arrested while I was showing the party attendees everything. That felt in my life the most vindicated I had ever experienced. Like several of their ex-coworkers and friends, almost everyone they had planned to wow was appalled as they watched them being revealed and hauled away under handcuffs. They continued to glare at me as if I had done something wrong, too proud and arrogant even then. So when their daughter was being brought away in handcuffs, my mother's grandparents were also at the party and became quite irate and avoided talking to me following the event. I was by myself in the house once everyone had departed and had no idea what to do. Though they had been arrested, they would most likely be released on bail in a few hours, hence I was devastated. Furthermore, it would take months to prove everything even if I intended to charge them. Even then, should they be able to turn things around for themselves, they had a great possibility of being let off the hook. I wouldn't get back the money meant for me till then. There was just no knowing what would happen. I would still be losing out no matter what. The names on the deed were Rob's and Mom's, not mine, hence I cannot precisely sell the house either. I would have to battle the matter with a lawyer even if if I wanted to formally compel her to sell the house and pay me the money. Now, since my friend and his father kindly offered to help to organize everything, I was free from concern about the expense of that. They reassured me I should not worry about it as they know what I'm going through and live close by. So now, though, I'm not sure what to do. Worse, the few people I had on my side are no longer in contact with me. Because they think I have been unappreciative, my mother's grandparents expressed no desire in talking with me. They stated they knew I didn't get along with my mother, but sending her to jail for something like this didn't sit right with them given all she had done for me. Their lack of desire for any interaction with me truly set me off. I feel totally alone right now. Although right now I may have defeated Rob and my mother, over time I feel like I have lost far more. I simply feel very powerless right now, and am not sure what to do. Am I the asshole for having my mother and her fiancé jailed for pilfering my cash to cover their new property purchase? Update 1. Hi there, out of the house Rob and my mother bought. I have moved. I reported them to the police 1 week ago, hence this is why. They were let go after 48 hours of custody and returned home. I opted to depart right away upon learning they would be returning as I wanted no confrontation. So I stepped out when they came in as I had already packed my belongings. Though I didn't want to interact with them, they urged me to stop and chat. So I left just as fast as I could. Having previously phoned a taxi, I got in and proceeded straight to my friend's house, where I have spent the past 3 days. For record's sake, this is the same friend whose dad assisted with the lawyer in arrest. So now the lawyer, the father of my friend, and I are collaborating daily to find out how to finish things up as fast as feasible. I am somewhat desperate at this moment, thus I am ready to get to a compromise. In a few days we have scheduled a meeting for their attorney, them and a court-appointed mediator. The negotiations will show how things go. Should they reject my terms, we will have to bring this before court, which could take some time. Though I want it to be fair, I am trying my best to reach a resolution. I want the money I need to complete my schooling. For now, my friend's father has informed me I should expect financial aid from them, but I am reluctant to take financial support from anyone else since it seems odd. Regarding my grandparents, none has contacted me yet. Clearly, my father's parents and my mother's grandparents stopped talking to me straight after they emailed me pictures of the paperwork. Apart from that, we haven't interacted thus far. I have gathered those records from them personally to provide some concrete evidence as well. They were fairly indifferent about the whole situation even when I walked over to pick those records from them. Though they wished me the best, they did not offer to assist me, or even extend an invitation for me to perhaps visit or perhaps interview. Since their behavior has been truly unusual for me to cope with, we really have no idea what's going on with them. So far, things have been somewhat disappointing. Nevertheless, I only hope I can overcome this fast so I may begin college. To be honest, right now I am only going by that. Of course, my friends are being rather helpful, which I truly appreciate because right now I have no family to talk of. Only these folks are really concerned about me. Update 2 high. Thus right now I'm not sure what to say as there has been an exciting development. What I discovered is terrible, hence I am literally shivering with rage. Once more, this is somewhat dubious, but my mother showed screenshots, thus I'm not sure what to believe. What happened was that today, just a few hours ago, my mother emailed me. There were just 2 days left until our mediation appointment. She said she really ought to talk to me. She couldn't get to me since I had blocked her everywhere else, but she opened a new email account and sent me something that truly screwed everything I knew to be true. I will hence not waste time, I will just get right to the point. Against me, my whole family plotted. Indeed, the reason all of my grandparents have been so strange throughout the process is that they have all been in on from the start. So not only had my mother squandered the money left to me by my father for herself, but all of them had taken their fair share and kept their lips closed in return. Because she had dirt on them, I at last know why my maternal grandparents were offended that I had reported my mother to the police and why they always seemed to be worried for me, but never really stood up for me when it came to her. I also now understand why my paternal grandparents had never even bothered to notify me that these signed papers my mother had left existed until I asked them. So my mother emailed me evidence of each of their having been in on this. She spoke with them when I was maybe 14 or 15 years old. She fortunately had all of this on file since they were stupid enough to have these email exchanges. And Mike R. She forwarded me screenshots of these emails. Since I got her arrested, my mother advised me it was only right that I bring these individuals into the matter as well, since it wouldn't be fair for her to be punished when they had all collaborated against me to hide the money and use it for themselves. My dad left a lot of money for me, and all these people, including his attorney, thought it would be better for them to keep it from me and spend it for themselves. This is still unbelievable to me. Over and over, I've been reading that email, trying to make sense of it since it seems ridiculous that all these people, including my dad's own parents, were against me. It's really rather shockingly amazing. Their conscience had finally checked in, they had a change of heart, therefore the sole reason they had notified me about the papers my mother had signed and given evidence recently. So when I phoned them to get aid, they chose to tell me the truth since they understood what they were doing was wrong. Although my mother and her parents had persuaded them not to tell me the truth as it would also bring them down, they had been intending to do this way earlier, although they had assured me they would not come to tell me everything. If I ever asked, they would most certainly be honest. All of this came to light when I inquired whether there was anything they could do to assist. They chose to offer me those records as evidence. Though it makes me happy they decided to assist me back then, it does not clear them. It also clarifies their strange and distant behavior even after helping me out because they were guilty. They are truly ashamed, which they should be, yet they still cannot own what they did. Right now, though, my brain is simply not working as it should. I just know how to handle any of this. I have no idea what to believe in. Since it's so vast and practically driving me crazy, I haven't even told my friend about what I discovered. All at once, I feel deceived, hurt, and enraged. Right now, I have no idea what to do with these feelings. Given this is a significant development, and we will most certainly bring this up during the discussions, I clearly have to discuss this with my attorney. Forgetting that she would also be losing out on a lot of things because of this process, my mother tried to flip the tide against the ones who exposed her. She told me all of this, and I'm happy she did, as I believe I should have known that other than a small number of people, nobody has my back on this planet. I guess this is how it is since I cannot rely on anyone. Right now, the only thing left to do is inform my friend so he may notify his father. Then we can all get down with my lawyer and discuss what to do about this and forward direction. Still, I am most sure I will be attending college this year. I am not wayversing. I have made my mind. I'm ready to ask the dad of a friend for assistance. Right now, I guess I will ask him to be a co-signer on my loan application. I am not asking him to pay my college tuition right now. Update 3. Hi, so we met with the mediator today, and as I mentioned, I very definitely mentioned what my mother had told me in the email. She basically came clean about everything she had done, and now she will have to pay for the money she and the rest of my family have pilfers from me. She also claimed, though, that some of the money went toward my upbringing, so we shouldn't it against her and shouldn't expect her to reimburse any of the sum taken. I do not buy it, though. My grandparents have to do as well. They stole not only that money, but also my hopes and aspirations. I want them to give it back to me so I may have a dignified life. I am not going to be reliant anymore. My friend's dad and my attorney told me that although these kinds of things are not unusual, they do not diminish the cunning and repulsive nature of it. Like me, they were enraged and properly so. They promised me they would make sure I wouldn't have to rely on anybody else for money my entire life. After my dad died, the type of money they pilfers would have made me comfortable for every single year of my life. Although he had done all the necessary steps to ensure I led a contented life, my family found it unacceptable. They just were selfish, hence they had to be taken away from me. Not that will fly with me anymore. After our conversation, my attorney and I agreed we were going for the throat. Particularly on my dime, there is no need for us to back off and let them have themselves. Though things were somewhat harsh there, one thing is certain: we will be meeting once more, and this time my grandparents, all of them, will be present as obviously they have also been involved in this. Things might go to court, but I'm going to deal with a student loan till then. I will ensure I get my justice. But more than justice, I have to retrieve from them money taken from me. Since the money was meant for me just and nobody else, all of them had to reimburse me.